Hello, everyone. My name is Rafael Vigil, and I would like to welcome everyone to my Hatchet Photography podcast. Today, I'm super excited because my guest is one of the leading hatchet photographer in our industry. He's also a writer for F-Stoppers. You also have very successful YouTube channel which focus on hatchet photography, business, portraits, and all sorts of really cool stuff. I'm big fan of your work, big fan of everything what you do and all the knowledge you're sharing because this is something that not many photographers, they're willing to do, and seems like you kind of push this completely different direction, and then you just really share your experiences, your knowledge. So thank you for that, and I'm sure a lot of people are really appreciated everything what you do for our industry. So welcome to the podcast. As I said, I can't wait to dive into our conversation. So welcome.
Thanks, Rafa. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate that. That's a very generous introduction you gave me. And I do appreciate it very much. I'm excited to talk with you. And yeah, let's anything photography, I'm always thrilled to talk.
Absolutely. So let's start with some kind of basic stuff. Could you tell me a little bit more about how did you get into hatchet photography? What was your path? Why did you choose hatchet photography? Because there's so many different genres of photography, and it seems like people go through some kind of they have own path, right? And like I don't know what's your path, and I want to kind of get into it. How does whole thing look like on your end?
Sure, sure. So I had a very interesting path that brought me to headshot photography, and I think I know a lot of photographers that I know have had kind of winding paths, and what's definitely not a direct line for me. But when I was probably about 16 years old, I was home one day, and my dad came home from work, and he said, and I was looking for a job, and my dad said to me, "Oh, the local camera store is looking for somebody. You should go and apply." And so I said, "Okay, that sounds cool." I was always growing up, I was into art, drawing and painting and stuff like that. And then I got into music. So I got a job at this camera store. I knew nothing about photography. And this was back in the old days where there was no internet. So the my boss said to me, "Well, you need to learn about photography." And I said, "Okay, cool." He gave me a Minolta SRT 101. And he said, "You can use this." And then I went to the library and I took out, like, I remember coming home with a stack of books like that about photography. And that's kind of how I got started. So, but then when I went to college, I kind of had like passion for photography and also for music. And I wound up studying music in college. So I did not study photography as my main focus, although I did a bunch of like elective courses, and I worked in the photo industry for the entirety of my college career as a camera salesman. And I did a lot of freelance work, and I did work for the school newspaper. So photography was always there while I was studying music. Fast forward, and I'm giving you, this is the abridged version. I won't go too long with this story,
Yes.
but
Oh, it's okay.
so um, after I graduated with my master's degree in music, I opened a music school where I
Hmm.
live on Long Island, and I started that business in 2006. And many years later, around 2016, we started a musical theater program at the school, and this is what really brought me to headshots. So
Mhm.
we told all the students, bring a headshot so that we can, use it in our program and stuff. And the kids would bring in like these like terrible iPhone photos or school photos that were like really had the worst expressions. And so I looked at these photos. I thought to myself, I love photography. I've been doing it all this time. I could do this. I could do better than that at least. And so that was my initiation to headshot photography. Is I just started taking pictures for our program. And shortly thereafter, I decided, well, I kind of like this. I want to get better at it. So I remember going to YouTube one day, and I just typed in like how to take headshots. And this guy pops up, and I watched this video, and I was like, this guy is hilarious. He's a little nuts. That's what I thought at first, but his video is awesome. And that was Peter Hurley. And
Mhm.
so that's how I discovered Peter Hurley and his work. And then pretty much immediately I joined his organization, which is called the Headshot Crew. And that's kind of where I really learned everything I know about headshot photography. So he's my mentor, and at this point, he's become a good friend. And I'm also now an associate in the Headshot Crew, which means that I reach, if you reach a certain level of proficiency, you become an associate member, which means Peter will actually recommend you for photography gigs, and you also train other photographers. So I routinely go and hang out at his studio when he does his headshot intensives and help other photographers. And that's kind of how I got here. During the pandemic, I had done the headshots was kind of just on the side, but during the pandemic, we had to physically close our school in New York here, the music school. And so I had an empty space and we were doing everything virtually. And that was kind of when I decided, okay, let me take this sort of side hobby / business that I wasn't really focused on. And now I'm going to turn it into a business. And that's when I really started working on it. And that's when I really started bringing people into my studio to refine my skills and hone my skills and bring it to the next level. So that was around 2020s when I really started the business.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So how's your style developed? And did you start it straight from, Peter's Harley kind of, because I've seen his, like, I'm big fan of him too. He's also big mentor for me. I've learned so much from him, and I think he's the kind of the first person who really put the headshots on the map.
Right.
And I think he established this amazing community. So do you think your style kind of like developed over the time? Like, what was the process? Because I know, like any other genres of photography, you're just starting somewhere, and then most of the time we suck, right? What do we do? And then over the time we kind of step by step trying to figure things out. So what was the biggest challenge for you as a headshot photographer, which, took you a little bit more time to kind of overcome and kind of master it?
Right. So that's a great question. I think that, well, when I started, the good thing for me, which in hindsight, I feel like this was a huge advantage, is I didn't know anything. Like, so when I started studying with Peter, like I knew basics about photography. I knew an aperture from a shutter speed, and I had a lot of that kind of knowledge, right? But when it came to actually putting a human in front of my camera and creating an image of them where they looked like they wanted to be there and where it was lit properly and where I understood lighting and all this, I started from ground zero. And I think this turned out to be a huge advantage because I was like a blank slate. So I remember early on, some of the biggest challenge for me, I think early on, was just getting over the fear of having a person in front of my camera. Because when I first started, I had never really taken any portraits of anybody. I was always afraid. I always had this sort of, and I think anyone who's become a headshot or a portrait photographer early on, I think we all have that fear because you have this person in front of your camera, and now it's all up to you to create an image of them and make them actually like it. And so that was the biggest challenge, was just kind of getting people in front of my camera and being comfortable with it. And so I started there with like friends and family, like most of us do. And then the biggest hurdle after that was in the same kind of way, was the first like sort of paying client who came to me that I didn't have a relationship with. I didn't know them at all. So that was a huge challenge. Outside of that, when I started studying with Peter, I think I went through what most newer photographers go through, is that, and I relate this to my world as a musician too, because there's so many similarities. But when you first start, you can't see anything. And I think that, and what I mean by that is you don't understand light when you first start, especially studio light, which is very, very specific, and face lighting, which there's so many different ways to light the face. There's so many different ways where the light and the shadow plays. And at first you just don't see it. So it takes quite a bit of time and quite a bit of practice before you start to get to that point where you're like, okay, now I can look at a photo and I say, yeah, I know exactly how this was lit, and I know what looks good, what doesn't look good, not just in a general sense, but also for the specific face in front of your camera. Because you might, if you get into that one lighting style, that might look great for a certain face, but maybe it needs to be tweaked or just completely different for a different face. And I relate that to music because I'm a bass player. And when I was about, I guess I started playing the electric bass when I was about 13 or 14. And I remember one of my friends, or it was my brother's friend who was a bass player, said to me, oh yeah, you just have to, you're not going to hear the bass at first, but if you listen and you pay attention when you're listening to music, eventually you'll hear it. And that was kind of my experience with music too. So I remember listening to the radio and I'm like, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, it like popped in my ear. Like, oh, I hear the bass now. And I really kind of had the same experience when it comes to seeing light on the face. And it's not like it's one and done, right? You know as well as I, like
Yes, absolutely.
it
But
never
just
ends.
can I tell you a little bit of a side story?
Sure.
I shot weddings for 10 years, and I thought like, well, I know maybe not everything, but lots about photography, shooting like 40 weddings a year. And then
Mhm.
I switched into hatchet photography and I was completely clueless, just so you
Right.
know. So it's like I think everyone starts from like scratch. Doesn't matter
Right.
how much experience you have. It's the same like people who, let's say, shooting headshot would have to go and shoot landscape. They also would have to do bunch of steps back in order to kind of learn the basics and understand a lot of things and get that experience. And also what I think what you have said, which is so important, that we don't see a lot of things, even though like let's say we've been doing photography, but like at the beginning I remember the same thing. I was just like, oh well, like I'm gonna just take bunch of lights, lit the person, and then everything should work, but it doesn't, and you don't see that, right? And you look at the image like, okay, it doesn't look like the top photographers work. It's not even close, and you just like, I've done everything what they have said, because we just don't see it. We need to get that experience. So
Yep.
100% on that. So tell
Yeah.
me, in your opinion, what is good headshot? What's the recipe and what's the ingredients of a good headshot based on your experience?
Well, so I'm it right in line with my mentor, obviously, on this. And I think that the most important thing that makes or breaks a headshot is the expression.
Mhm.
And you can kind of get away with the lighting not being perfect. You can kind of get away with the background not being the best, or even the crop being a little,
Mhm.
not really where you want it, if the expression is really engaging. And this is something that I always make number one, my priority. Because
Mhm.
think about it this way: you could have the best lit photo where the person's hair, makeup, if it's if they're wearing makeup, their clothing, everything can be perfect. But if their expression sucks, no one's going to be
Perfect.
drawn into the photo, right? And
Absolutely.
so I think that's number one. And then what does expression mean? Well, I know, like, we definitely have in headshots, there's different kinds of expressions that I know that I try and coach out of my clients, but I don't think it's like a one size fits all on expression either. I think it's kind of depends on the person's face, and also the purpose of the headshot and all of that, which we can talk about too. But it's got to be a photo that draws people in. That's number one, because a headshot is basically like a visual business card for
Mhm.
somebody, right? Whether you're an actor, whether you're a corporate person, you're a lawyer, a doctor, whether you're an executive in a Fortune 500 company, the purpose of that photo is that people should see it and immediately be drawn into it, and to look at the person in the headshot, and understand that, okay, this is a person who is, is making a statement with the photo. So that's where I begin. That's where most of my coaching is too. It's mostly on expression with my
Absolutely.
clients.
Well, I 100% agree with you. And I think we can get out of, like, as you said, with lighting and bad backgrounds and all this stuff. But if the face expression is not right, it's pretty much waste. And then, so how your process look like to getting people into the right zone? That's how I actually approach this. because
Right.
there's different type of clients, right? There's some of them come in and then 5 minutes later you're done because they know how to, or they have this natural personality, I think sometimes, where they can really easy, they're outgoing and they can kind of give you what you're looking for. But there are some clients, which we all know, this is sometimes where it's really struggle.
Yep.
And there's, and also I think hatchet photography is really personal, right? So you're not like working like weddings where you just jump into like big crowd of people and just taking photos of them. You have to connect with them. You need to somehow get them to the right place where they're going to producing those right face expressions. So let me ask you this: how you deal with those difficult clients? Do you have any tips or any kind of ways of dealing with those clients? What's how you approach those difficult people who they kind of, I would say, they're hard to get into?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Mhm.
As I know, we all do. Like you said,
Yes.
when you photographed a lot of people, you start to really understand that. And it's one thing that I'll say about on this topic, which is important, is it has nothing to do with um, how good looking, whatever you want to call it, a person is, or it's really some people, even if you work with models and actors, sometimes they're the most difficult to kind of get a
Mhm.
great expression out of. They might be really like young and good looking or beautiful or so that part you don't have to think about as much, but they might have no idea. A lot of times they don't actually how to, express and something besides that sort of like vacant stare that they all do. So I think that when it comes to difficult clients, I think that a lot of times it's not even the corporate clients. And the reason I brought that up is because, like, well, look, sometimes you look at it like, well, a corporate client who goes in front of a camera once every 10 years will probably be more of a challenge than an actor who's photographed, every day. And sometimes that's not the case. So I find that very interesting. But when it comes to how to deal with those more difficult clients, and if you run a business of any kind, um, but it's, for us specifically as headshot photographers, if you run a headshot business, it doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter how great your work is, you will deal with difficult clients. So I think the first thing is as for us as photographers, is to remember that this is something you're going to deal with, sooner or later, on some level or another. And it's tough for us because we're artists as well as business owners. So you have to put aside that kind of like indignation of like feeling like, or the sadness that sometimes comes from feeling like, oh, it's my art. This is my art though. And they don't like my art. So you gotta kind of put that aside first. But I think that my goal when it comes to dealing with difficult clients is to do my best to avoid a difficult client to begin with.
Mhm.
And so I think that what we should do as photographers is the first thing is you must have your process worked out. Because think about it, a lot of times if you have a client who's not happy, it could just be because your lighting isn't very good, right? So if you have a client who comes in and you don't know how to light them properly and they have weird shadows on their face and they say they don't like the photo, well, that's not a difficult client. That's your lack of skills. So when I coach people or when I do like I'll do like online coaching or in-person coaching with other photographers. What I tell them is that right away, like, well, you can do a number of things to avoid those difficult clients, which is first have your skills honed. Like, what's one of the most basic things that is always a mistake you see in headshot photography is
Mhm.
a person who looks out to lunch, right? Or their smile is fake and it looks like a sixth grade yearbook photo. And, so that is on us as the photographers. That's not on the client necessarily, right? Because or at very least, you could say there's shared, like shared
Yeah.
responsibility. But in my book, it's really on me. If I can't get a person to smile in front of my camera, I'm doing something wrong. So process, knowing your lighting, being consistent is another thing that I talk about a lot with people. Is there's when I first started with headshot photography, every shoot was like let me start from scratch and then just figure it out all from again. And I want to do something completely different. Like I didn't even know what my shutter speed and aperture was, like from one shoot to the next, and the lights would be all over the place. So another thing that really made a big difference for me personally is I just, once I set up my space, I just left the lights, I left my camera, everything at the same setting, and then I tweaked it for the particular face. So I think being consistent in your process, being consistent even in how you interact with clients will help. So I haven't answered your question yet.
Okay, that's okay.
How do you deal with difficult clients? But I feel like this, all of this stuff that we can do as photographers will avoid as many difficult clients as possible, right? So that's your main goal. But now when it comes to a more difficult client, I think that you have to be, first thing is you have to be patient. And you also have to be empathetic because, it's easy to get impatient with people, especially if you're spending a lot of time with them. But like if I have a difficult client who's just, and I shoot tethered to a large screen. So as we go, I'm showing them the photos. And so if they're difficult, it's 99% of the time, it's because they don't like something about their face.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see it because we don't look at our own face any way that other people see it, right? Your own view of your own face and your own body is very much based upon how you were treated growing up, or a comment that some kid made to you on the playground when you were 10. I mean, these kind of things really can affect a person forever. So I think that the first thing you need to do, and what I do, is I try to be empathetic and remember, okay, even if I think this person looks great, and even if they do look great, they don't feel that they do. So it's my responsibility to, meet them where they're at and be empathetic about it. And I think that your process and how you do it is going to really help you to win over those difficult clients. I had a very difficult client. It was about a month ago, a couple of weeks ago. And I knew before this person came in for the shoot that they were going to be difficult because they told me. I had like an email exchange and a phone call and a text exchange, and they were asking a lot of questions. And I'm like, okay, this person clearly is very much invested. They're going to be on top of the details. But then they just said to me, look, I'm very difficult. I'm going to tell you right now. And so I said, don't worry about it. My process is collaborative and you're going to be involved in it, and you're not going to leave until you're happy. So that's exactly what we did. Now you're totally right. That like sometimes you get someone who comes in and really within the first 10 frames that you snap, you're done, and they got an awesome headshot and they look amazing. And I think that the better you get at being a photographer, at being a headshot photographer, the more common this becomes. And I think that it kind of makes it harder in a way when you get that one difficult client who's being extra picky. So that's what I do to make them happy. I'm patient. I'm compassionate. I try and empathize with them. And then I just take the time that's needed. Like I think a lot of photographers bill by the hour. I don't bill by the hour. So in my studio, I just kind of keep it open-ended. So if I have a client that I need to go over a little bit for, and we need to just tweak things, then we do that. And a lot of that also has to do with like their hair, how the hair is styled. Maybe sometimes they just, and people, and you have to be honest with people too. Like a lot of times photographers want to avoid like the elephant in the room, right? So if someone comes into my studio and they have like a severe eye difference, for example, or a scar that's very noticeable on their face. When I first started, I would be like, oh God, I don't want to mention that because I don't want to offend them. But like, they know. It's not like you're not going to, it's not like they don't realize they have a scar on their face. It's not like they don't realize one eye isn't really lined up with the other. And so what I do is I make sure that I just say, hey, I noticed you have a little bit of an eye difference. And you say it nicely, obviously, it's the way you do it. That makes a difference. But how would, let's do our best to correct that. And I want you to be happy. Or I noticed you have a scar. Would you like me to remove it? And actually, I find that my clients are glad that I'm just being frank and honest with them, and then you're providing solutions too, instead of it just being like, okay, well, I'm just going to ignore something and hope that they don't care. So I don't know if that answers the question,
Yes,
but
well, it does. And you know what? I think you just put a really deep input how this whole thing works. And again, I 100% agree with everything what you have said. And like that's I think what is also amazing about headshot photography is that every client is different,
right.
and we learn from each session something new, which is fascinating. That's why I really fall in love with headshot photography,
Yeah.
and just creating that bond and that connection, and then being honest, and as you said, and this is also what is extremely important about looking at our work first, what we can do on our end to make sure that the process look flawless, and then we can kind of jump into the next steps. And also what I've learned over the years, that as you said, people are really self-aware about themselves, and sometimes they have those kind of hidden things which they don't want to talk about it, or they kind of afraid of that the face looks different way. But as Peter Hurley said many times, most people don't even notice those things. This is just that's their thing, that they kind of aware of it. They kind of don't want to expose this, I don't know, more. And this is in our hands to make them kind of comfortable, and then kind of share with them how the process look like. So that's amazing input. And yeah, everything what you have said, like 100% kind of on the same page. So let's kind of switch the gears a little bit, and even though I don't want to talk about it much, but let's jump into equipment, because this is something that most people request. They want to hear about it. There's a lot of how you call it, gear
Gearheads.
junkies who, like, that's the only thing they want to listen to.
Yeah.
So let's jump into your gear. How this Let's start, maybe, like, did you have any kind of process into getting the equipment you like to work with, or you just kind of started from the right foot, and then you just kind of have this like perfect setup, and you start kind of shooting? How this whole thing look like on your end?
Right, right. Well, I'm a big gearhead. I love the gear,
Okay.
so I don't mind talking about it. But I also will put it right into perspective right from day one. The gear really matters very little, as we know. But it does matter. But I'll tell you
Yes.
that for me, I built my headshot business on a Canon 5D Mark III, and some Alien Bees lights. So
Okay.
I had it. The camera was like, I don't know. I bought it used when it was like already like 6 years old, and that's kind of how I built my business. And I used that up until less than a year ago. That was what I was using, a Canon 5D Mark III with
Mhm.
a 7200 2.8. And that was basically all I used, and a 50 millimeter for some portraits, like wider crop portraits,
Mhm.
and Alien Bees in strip boxes. So that, I think that if you want to become better as a photographer, because all of us photographers, I mean, on some level or another, we all get a little gear obsessed. We love gear. Who doesn't love like a new
Yes.
toy to play with, right? But my suggestion for people who are getting into it is use what you have at first, and don't spend money if you have no clients, right? The idea is if you have some stuff, use it at first. So I built my business on that. But then when it started growing, then the first thing that I upgraded was my lighting system. And so I would say 90% of, well, for 100% of my Head and Shoulders headshots, I use a Westcott Flex Kit, which is
Mhm.
basically the same thing that Peter Hurley uses as
Yep.
well. And I have the older kit, which has it's a series. It's two 1x3 panels and two 1x2 panels, and I use generally either a triangle or a C shape or some kind of modified shape like that for headshots. And then I use it for portrait work too. And I upgraded my camera, like I said, about less than a year ago, but now I'm shooting on a Canon R5.
Mhm.
And I'm using still my older lenses too. So I haven't upgraded. I haven't gotten any newer lenses yet. And I rant about a lot of this stuff in my YouTube videos. Like I love talking about gear. So I rant a little bit about the gear. So there's some stuff where I do that as well. But the camera is like, the thing is with the eye tracking autofocus, it's really made a big difference in how I shoot, because you don't need to be worrying about focusing really almost not at all, because it's that good. So it's definitely made the great gear will make a big difference. And I think that when I talk to people about gear, the thing I also say is don't buy garbage, because one of the big mistakes I made early on is like I would buy these like really crappy stands, for instance. And the worst thing you can do is buy those inexpensive stands, because you use them a few times and then they don't work and they break and they fall apart. So if you're getting into this or if you're invested in it, then I think you're better off to buy something good. Doesn't mean you have to spend the most money on like the highest end equipment, but you definitely want to get stuff that's going to last. And I think the biggest investment is, besides getting lights that you can actually use properly, is just to get a good lens. So whatever you're using, I mean, I have tons of. I also shoot with Fuji, by the way. Sometimes I use it in my studio. I have a Fuji X-T4 and a couple of lenses with that, and I love that as well. But for most of my studio work, I'm using the Canon gear. And Fuji I like to take with me and use it for like street photography and portraits outside and like family photos and stuff like that. What else do I use here? I have some backdrops from Artery Backdrops, which I really love. And outside of that, I shoot tethered to Capture One. That's how I import the images. And then after, I don't really edit much in Capture One, though. I edit in Affinity Photo. And that's where I do the bulk of, if I'm doing portraits, especially with color grading, I'll edit them in Affinity Photo. But my goal is with headshots is I want it to be almost perfect right in the camera, right? So then when I take it out of there, it's hopefully it's going to be very little in the editing room. And it's definitely, when it comes to headshots, I'm not going to change any coloring. It's just going to be when portraits that I like to color grade.
So do you retouch your photos yourself, or you send them out for retouching?
I do both. It depends on the project, and it depends on how much it's involved, and it depends on the kind of photo I'm taking too, because so I know everyone defines a headshot a little bit differently, but for me, I define a headshot as a head and shoulders photo. So my head and shoulders headshots are my goal for them is always going to be like very flattering, natural lighting. It's going to be kind of realistic lighting. I don't want it to look color graded. But then I'll do portrait work, which is anything that's a looser crop. So it could be a half, 3/4, full, or any kind of different kind of angles and things like that. And then usually with those, I'll color grade them. And I do all the color grading. I either do myself, or I use LUTs, or my portrait mentor, who's also part of the headshot crew, is Ivan Weiss, and so I use his LUTs sometimes. And then I also use a program called Dehancer, which does like film simulations. So sometimes I'll use that. It kind of depends on just where the photo is and what I'm trying to do creatively.
Perfect. I'm going to just share your website. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So those are your fantastic headshots.
Thank you.
Let's go to your portrait work. Yes. Perfect. So
I don't think you can click on those portraits, which is
no. You can't also click on the headshots, right?
Nope. And you know what? Now I see something I need to fix on my website. That's good though.
Yes, you know what? I really like the simplicity of your website, right? Because it gets you right in, and then you have amazing examples of headshots. So let's talk about it. Let's talk a little bit about business. So how was your approach to business? Like, what would advice you would give to photographers who try and get into headshot photography? How they can start their business? Of course, they need probably, some at least decent portfolio. That's, I think, is the starting point. But
Right.
what would be the next steps? How they can approach businesses? How they can approach, I don't know, potential clients? What would be your advice on that?
Right, right. So I think that oh, actually, you know what, before I forget, if you go to my Instagram page, you could probably scroll through that. That might be better for if you want to see some photos up close.
Yes.
But when it comes to business, I think that the first hurdle that I had to get over was believing that I could do it. And I know that might sound like a little silly, but that was the first major hurdle I had, is that I didn't think I could do it. And I remember for a long time feeling bad and looking at like other photographers who were successful. And I would look at their work and I'd look at and I'd be like, wow, I just wish I could do that. And it was a big struggle for a time. But then once I just decided, A, that I know I can do it, and B, that I'm going to do it, it made a huge difference. So that's the first step. You gotta believe you can do it. Now, as far as practical steps, well, I think the first thing you want to do, like you said, is get a bunch of people in front of your camera. So if you don't know anything, if you're not sure, just get some friends, conscript your friends and family and make them be your test subjects. That's exactly what I did. So I have tons of horrible photos that of my family members and friends that was my testing ground and my learning ground. So that was where I started. And then the second thing I recommend is you want to get a mentor. I know for me, mentorship has been key to how fast I've been able to grow my business, because it's not just a matter of, so I have multiple mentors. I have multiple photography mentors, and I also have multiple business mentors, because it's not just about becoming great at photography. Like that's wonderful. And you have to do that. But the problem is that there's tons and tons and tons of great photographers who have horrible businesses, right? So just because, and then I know many photographers who maybe are not the best. They're probably, they're competent, they're good. Some of them are okay, but they're doing a fabulous business. So I think that the business skills are a totally separate thing that you have to deal with. And it's tough for us because we're creatives. And I know that like the creative part is usually, where we want to put most of our energy. So what I did after I started doing that was then I started to not even advertise, but I kind of just put it out there in my own network. So some of my earliest clients were people I knew from the music industry. And I also, I teach part-time at a university. And so I just started posting some photos I would take, whether it would be of students or a friend, on Facebook. And then all of a sudden, some of my colleagues at the university reached out to me and said, hey, I need a headshot. Can you do that for me? And that's kind of where I started to grow it organically. And so what I would recommend, because if you want to be a headshot photographer, I think most people who are getting into this are already probably coming from a different industry, right? Or I know a lot of people are. So I just mentored someone who is in the banking industry. And I told him, well, everyone you work with needs a great headshot. So pick somebody, take some photos of them for free, and make sure they're good, and make sure they look good, and make sure that the person has a look that's going to help you to get work. And then put those out there to your other friends, and start with your own network. So that was one thing I did. But I feel like you got to take like a multi-pronged approach. So what I do to grow my business is I actually do Google Ads, which at first I spent too much money on, but I kind of wanted to push my site high in the rankings. So I did Google Ads, and every month I kind of lower the budget as the organic reach of my site works better. Reaching out within my own network, like I just said about, like contacting people, or even just posting stuff on your social media, that people can see that you're doing it, right? Because you might be doing this on the side, but if you don't have an Instagram page or a Facebook page that shows people what you're doing, that they're not going to know. And then I actually I believe very strongly in cold calling and cold emailing. And
Okay.
I mean, I hate doing it, but I got to tell you that one of the things that really does work is, and then I thought to myself one day, I'm like, about cold calling, I thought to myself, well, if it didn't work, people wouldn't do it. So if people are doing it, it must work. And so one day I just made a little email, and I made it specifically for lawyers. And I wrote, like, something about how important a professional headshot is and how you want to be seen in a certain light, and you want to make sure this and that and the other thing. I was worded it very, very specifically to appeal to lawyers. And then I Googled every lawyer within like a 30-mile radius of my studio. And I just started cutting and pasting, and sending it out to all these different law firms. And I would say every 100 emails you send, and it took me about an hour, I would say, maybe a little more than an hour to send about 100 emails, because you just copy and paste it. I would get at least 3 or 4 inquiries and at least 1 client out of it. And some of them turned out to be very great clients who paid, came in and spent a lot of money. So I think stuff like that is important. And then making sure that your website is optimized too. Like, a lot of people, it always fascinates me, because if you want to be a headshot photographer, for instance, right? And so, as you said, coming from the wedding industry, if I'm Googling headshots and your name pops up, and then I click on your website and I see a bunch of wedding photos, well, I'm probably going to click off and try another website, right? Because people are looking for what they're looking for. So one thing that I usually recommend to photographers is make sure that your website reflects your branding. Now, you can do all those other kinds of genres, and that's a whole nother discussion, right? I think I personally think that most people are looking for a specialist over a generalist, but there are people in the photography industry who do work as a generalist, meaning they will take headshots, they will take portraits, they will do school photos, they will do weddings and this and that, maternity, boudoir, whatever, and they make that work. That's not the model I use. I don't think that's the best model, but I think it does work for some people. But for me, I don't want people to go to my website and see anything but what I want to be paid to work and do. And so I want them to be able to access it very quickly. A lot of my mentors and friends in the photography industry say, create the work you want to be paid for. And so that's what I've done on my website. And that's actually how I grew my portrait part of my business, is because I just loved this particular style, and I learned how to do it. And now I'm still learning and refining it. And now people contact me specifically and say, oh, I saw this image on your site, I would love to do that. So I think having a website that's optimized, having a website that has proper keywords and proper tagging, like all of this kind of technical stuff, which I'm not into, is also important for growing your business. And then know your worth. That's another big thing. Like, for a long time, I mean, because a lot of the people you're going to start working with will be sort of friends and friends of friends. And I think for us photographers and anyone who opens a small business, at first, you kind of feel like you need to give everyone a deal of some kind. And so for a long time, I was like doing stuff like that. And then one day I just said to myself, well, I'm not going to do that anymore, because I don't want to be known as the bargain basement photographer. That was one reason why. And the other reason why is because I know I'm good at what I do, and I deserve to be paid for it. And like, so if you have a friend who, or a relative, for instance, who works, in a different industry, and you want to use their services, like, I personally am not going to go to them and say, give me a deal. I mean, I respect them, right? And I want them to, I kind of think of it the other way, knowing what it's like and how tough it is if you own a small business. So I feel like just pay the people what they're worth. So I think know your worth, hone your skills, get those, and just do things. Like, one of the things, that you have to do in today's world is, and I don't really necessarily love doing it half the time. Sometimes I enjoy it, but like, you got to just be active in the social media world, right? And I can say that LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, although Instagram kind of kind of sucks
Yeah, it's
now.
dying a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it, right? But back even like a year ago, Instagram was one of the ways that I really grew my business. But now they don't even, like, if you put a photo up, they barely even promote it. So
Yeah. I don't know actually, and it happened so drastically, right? Like
yeah,
literally overnight with Instagram. But
yeah,
as you said, like we have to be versatile, right? Like you cannot
right,
just focus on one place and then hoping that the client's gonna come to you. So that's something I think we all kind of learned the hard way. So from one hand, I think it's like I'm not happy what's happening with the Instagram, but also it's a lesson for us that we cannot really focus just on one place and hoping
right,
it's going to stay forever, right?
exactly.
Um, I
Especially
also,
the
yeah, go
algorithms
for
today.
it.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, and also I don't know what's your impression on that, but I really also deeply believe in word of mouth. This is one of the things which also kind of grow my business. If you provide good service and then clients is happy and then they can recommend you. And those are like whenever you're getting those kind of recommendation, I found those clients are like they calling you or they contacting you and it's a done deal. You don't have to do all this crazy stuff to get them on board. They just they get the recommendation and they want to work with you. So that's something, but also that takes time, I found, right? Like building a business. And this is another thing which we should mention is building any type of business. It takes time. You cannot just expecting you buy the lights, you have all this stuff, you have kind of couple headshot sessions under your belt, and then the client's going to be just banging on your door. That's not never going to happen.
Right.
And another important point which you mentioned, I want to also kind of emphasize this, is that creative part and business, it's completely two different things. And I've
Right.
been struggling with this. I remember for many years, because I was just mainly focusing on being creative, producing good images, and the business was kind of like putting on the side. It was kind of like going on its own. And
Yeah.
then when I really started learning and kind of implementing some of those stuff which should be implemented, that's when I saw like massive jump into revenue and just growing your business in general, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and to go back to the word of mouth thing first. So word of
Mhm.
mouth that is the best way to get clients, because you're totally right. Like when someone talks you up to their friend and they don't know you at all, they all now when they call you, they feel like they know you. They're
Yeah.
invested in you. So it's not like a strain, like someone who just calls your number, who just saw a photographer, and then you have to explain to them why you're great. You had someone who had a great experience telling their friend, oh, go to him, he's great, this is what blah 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 blah. And so when they contact you, they already know it's going to be a great experience, so you don't have to sell them. They just that's so yeah, word of mouth, that's always the best. And but you're right, you have to make sure you're providing that experience when they're in there. And I totally agree with you. The business is one thing, photography is another thing. And there if you I believe that if you can become successful at business, it really is regardless of what you do specifically, because there's so many principles. I mean, it's might be different for each industry to some level, right? But when it comes to just good business practice, there's so many basic things that every industry has to do. And I feel the same way as you. Like, as someone who's naturally a creative and artistic, like, we like doing those things. We don't
Mhm.
like necessarily answering emails or following up with phone calls or doing all of these kinds of management things, but you have to. And I think that it's also the simple things. Like, I know, if you don't get back to people in a timely manner when they email you, you're not going to get clients. If you don't follow up with people, so say someone inquires about your services and then you decide, well, I sent them a reply and that's the end of that, like, you're losing money, you're losing business that
Yes.
way. Or if you don't pick up your phone, and I know it's like, this is also a generational thing. I think in the
Mhm.
cell phone age, a lot of us are at that point where, like, you just don't necessarily like picking up your phone, but you have to. If you, and especially for me, like, my business line is tied to my cell phone line. So if my phone
Mhm.
rings, I pick it up because that's a potential client. And I've booked so many people over the phone. just because I've answered it. Whereas sometimes people will call. If you don't pick up, they're just going to call the next number. So that's very important to pick up the phone. And then the other thing is, especially if you have a good personality, I think personality is a big part of being a great headshot photographer. A lot of it is personality, because people want to feel comfortable with you. And it doesn't mean you have to be extroverted and be a certain kind of person or pretend to be somebody, but you just have to be someone who people want to be around. So whatever that means for your personality. But when they call you, if you chat with them, then they get a feel for you. And I know a lot of my clients have booked with me based on that too. It's just like, oh yeah, well, you were, I got a good vibe from you on the phone, and you were friendly, and I knew I'd be comfortable. Because that's the other thing with what we do, right? Like most people, they look at going, they would rather, I had a client the other day tell me, I would rather go to the dentist than come here and take a headshot. And I just like, I get it. I know.
Yeah.
But people don't like it. So if you can make them comfortable, even in that process from the very beginning, that's going to make a big difference. And like on my website, I have embedded a little video, and it's just me talking about my process and talking about what I do and this and that. And I've had so many clients tell me, I booked with you because I saw your video, and I just knew that it would be fun and comfortable, and it would be something that I would feel comfortable about. I wouldn't feel nervous. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think personality is huge. And also the one thing what I want to also add to this, because we talk a little bit about, the business practices and stuff, but also I think is extremely important when it comes to just the actual headshot session. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say, if we don't have this kind of open personality, and we're not trying to, like, I would say, we are friendly, but we're faking it a little bit. People kind of can sense that.
right.
And that's going to reflect the session, because I remember from my own experiences that, and there was nothing to do with my personality, but I have just shitty day. And, there's a lot of things happening. The client came in, and I was just like bubbling from, this emotions, and then all this negativity, and just reflect the photo shoot, right? And then, the person is looking at you, and you just like angry, and then you just don't have this kind of personality so they can feel comfortable. It's going to affect the session, and it's going to just, the person's not going to feel comfortable, and we're going to kind of really see that right away.
Definitely.
So I think that's something also people have to remember, that getting into the studio or getting into the session, also you have to leave all these bad things behind you, or try to separate them, or try to kind of, like, I'm not saying to forget about them, but at least don't put that on the client. Because if, again, like, we have those clients too, they coming in with the bad mood, right? And they try to push this whole thing on us, and you're just like, okay, I cannot really take this, because if I'm going to go that path, this rabbit hole, this whole session is going to be waste, because we both going to be angry on something. So I'm always trying to navigate these people to some kind of positive place where, we can both have fun.
Yeah. And if you look at it as a challenge, like if you get someone who comes in and they have, first of all, I find that if they seem like they have a bad attitude, it's 99% of the time they're nervous, and they just don't know how to act, because they're just nervous, and it has nothing to do with you necessarily as a photographer.
Yes.
They're just afraid to be photographed, and so that's going to be part of it. So if you look at it as a challenge, like, okay, when I win this person over, they're going to be so happy. And if you look at it that way, it makes it fun, it makes it challenging. And then you can turn someone who maybe was just coming in because they had to, or they just didn't, or begrudgingly, or whatever and again, it's like goes to empathy too, right? Because you don't know what they might have just got a call on the phone driving to the shoot that their, mom is sick, or that, there's, something happened at work. So you don't know what baggage they're bringing in.
Yes.
So it's always good to don't take it personal, because if they're just coming in and they seem a little off, they booked with you, so it's not going to have to do with you personally. But being empathetic like that, and seeing it as a challenge. I have a funny story about that. So I work with this company that sends me their new hires, and the guy who runs the company, I took his headshot years ago before I really even had my business up and running. I was just kind of still doing it on the side, but he came in for a headshot. We did the headshot. He loved it, and he became like one of my biggest fans. And so now his company, he built is really growing, and he sends me all of his new hires. So I had like one after another, and they'd come in and he talked me up to them how great I am, and they all love the photos. And so then I get this one guy from his company who books, and so I send him in, and so he books online. I send him an email. Hey, I'm looking forward to working with you, and like the typical prep email. And he replies and he says something like, just so you know, I'm doing this photo shoot under protest. I told the boss I don't want my photo taken, and I don't even want to come there. And it's like, I was like, oh, okay. And so,
Good start.
yeah, that was how the relationship got started. And so I replied with my typical stuff. Don't worry, you'll love the photo, blah, blah, blah. And then he sends a reply in all caps. Again, I am doing this under protest, and you will not share any images without my approval. Like, he got like really like, so
wow.
yeah. So this is how, so then I'm like, so then I contacted the boss, which was a bad idea in hindsight, because then I said to the boss, I'm like, look, this guy really doesn't want to come in for a photo. Are you sure you want to make him do this? And then the guy got even more mad at me because, why did you tell my boss that I didn't want? So it was like the deck was way stacked against me before the guy even showed up. And so I spoke to some of my friends about it in one of my mentoring groups I'm in, and one of them gave me that piece of advice, which now I use every time, which is like, look at it as a challenge. Like, don't get upset. Don't be mad and get all angry and then confront the guy, and don't be an idiot when he comes to your studio. You got to do it. Just win him over. And so the guy comes, he walks in, and he's kind of like a middle-aged, like very Italian guy. And so me being Italian and both of us kind of similar, like definitely had a similar upbringing. I was like, all right, I'm just going to kind of win the guy over. So I was just my normal self, and hey, what's up? All right, I know you don't want to be here, but let's just give it a try. And so I put him behind the lights, and then I say to him something like, I don't know, like, give me a look like you just whacked someone, or something. Like, I made some mafia joke, and the guy just lost it. And he gave me like but he didn't like start cracking up because he was so ready to be angry about the whole thing. Like, his boss armed him into coming in this photo shoot. He did not want to be there. And so he was just but he cracked this like little smile, and it looked really cool. And I snapped the photo, and I said, all right, come and look at it. And so I remember the guy coming out from the lights and walking around, and I see his eyes following the screen as he comes closer. And now I know he wants to tell me, like, oh my God, I love this photo after all the grief I caused you. But his pride couldn't let him do that, So he just kind of looked at it. He's like, and so I was like, okay. You love the photo. And so then he kind of laughed, and that was it. So I turned this guy who, this could have been the worst client, and it turned out to be the guy loved the photo. His wife loved the photo. And he left happy. And that was such a great experience for me, because it reminded me, like, and I don't know why the guy didn't want his photo. Like, he might have been made fun of all his life, about his face, about a certain feature. And so that's kind of how I approach it now. So when someone comes in and their energy is off, I just try and, just disarm them. But I don't think you should be someone else. Like, one of the things that I noticed too with people is, early on, when you're trying to become a headshot photographer, a lot of people will try and act like a lot of people in the headshot crew will try and act like Peter Hurley. Now, Peter is a 1 in a million guy. I mean, he's got that.
Yeah, I don't think you can copy him. You have to have his personality, right?
Yep. He's 1 in a million. And so early on, I would try and like use his jokes and be like Peter. And I realized quickly, this isn't working. And people are just looking at me sort of confused, because it's just the jokes don't land right or whatever, because it's not me. Then I just decided I'm just going to be myself. And when I did that, I noticed there was a big change. So I think if you're naturally sort of more quiet and sort of more reserved, there's nothing wrong with that. I know a lot of photographers who will have that personality, and they create awesome work, and they have a great business, but they embrace who they are, and they're comfortable with themselves, and in their own way, they make the person disarmed behind the lens,
Yeah, that's super important. And I think it's great you sharing this, because I'll tell you my story with Peter Hurley jokes. Actually, one of my clients just walked off the shoot, and I
Oh,
know
wow.
that the joke didn't land well. And again, like, you know, like you have to have specific personality, right? So people
Right.
know who you are, and they know this is the specific joke. But if you put this joke in someone else's mouth, it doesn't look good sometimes, right? And that's what I've
Exactly.
learned. And a
Yeah.
lot of headshot photographers forget about it. And I think this is also what I 100% agree with you, and this is extremely important, that a lot of those, I would say, really tense situations, we can kind of like make them, well, we can lose them up, and then we can just kind of switch them into our own advantage. But
Hmm.
again, it comes from us, right? It comes from the kind of anger, or, oh, I'm going to show him he doesn't want to be here, but I'm going to just do it anyways. But if you have completely like the approach you had, that okay, I'm gonna take this as a challenge, I'm gonna try to make this guy kind of guy, put it in a different mindset, and hopefully we'll get something out of this. And I've been into situations many times. I think every headshot photographer goes through that, right? We have those clients who just, they don't want to be here, right? They don't want to shoot, they don't want to be at the front of the camera, they have some things which, they kind of, well, they don't want to share with the world.
Right.
But as soon as you can kind of maybe not convince them, but you can kind of prove them they have something to offer, they're good looking, and then you can kind of show them the photo which really kind of impress them, just completely change the story. I'll tell you like a little one story which I had a couple of years ago. It also kind of taught me those kind of, it was a little bit of similar situation. So I have a real estate agent,
Hmm.
and she came into the shoot, and everything went okay. I thought that the session went great, we have great images. And then she sent me like really nasty email the next day that she hates the photos. And then I'm like, oh my god, like what happened? Like, she was completely on the different side yesterday. And then I said to her, look, you know what, why don't we do this way? Let's start with, if you could show those images to your family, to your friends, and if there will be anybody there who don't like those pictures, I'll give you either a refund, or or we kind of do another shoot. And 2 days later, she emailed me the nicest email ever. She said, I love the photos, and then I got on the phone with her, and all of a sudden, she's telling me about the divorce she's going through, and then that there's all sorts of issues
Right.
associated, and then she took this very personally. So she saw herself as a kind of person who was losing in life, and then now this whole thing just kind of hit her like a ton of brick and straight in the face, and
Yeah.
she needed kind of reassurance from the family. She's okay, she's looking good, she still have a lot of stuff to achieve in her life. But that's also, a lot of people bring a lot of personal issues to the shoots, right, which we have to kind of put it on the side.
Yeah, definitely. And not only that, but a lot of people you work with, if you're a headshot photographer, are like that particular lady. They're in a transition in their life. Like a lot of
Yeah.
times people will come to you because they just lost their job, or they just got laid off, or they're getting a divorce, or stuff like that. So they're not necessarily, I mean, a lot of them will come to you because they want to get a new job, right? Or something good happened, they got
Mhm.
promoted. But there is a lot of them who are at that vulnerable point. And so that, yeah, you definitely, and I think that the way you handle that is exactly right. Because, I know some photographers who would not want to ever offer a reshoot, and they just want to kind of get defensive about it and stuff like that. But the other thing you want to remember is that each client represents either a positive or a negative to
Mhm.
your reputation in the community. And everybody knows that if someone has a bad experience, they will tell 10 people. If they have a good
Yes.
experience, they might tell 5, right? Because just the human nature. That's why cable news works, right? Because
Mhm.
people like negativity, right? That's why that's like the entirety of the internet works. Like, so the negative, people love sharing negative stuff more than positive stuff for whatever reason. So, turning that client into someone who's positive is really important. And at the end of the day, especially if you're growing a new business. So for someone whose business is still new, and say you have a client like that, if you just not offering a reshoot, it's just you're building a bad reputation, or not being compassionate. And I'm not saying like you should roll over for people either. Like I had a client early on who was like clearly this guy just wanted to take advantage of me and was just complaining just to get a discount. So sometimes that'll happen too. I don't think we should just, do that. But obviously, if it's someone who's just there's a real reason why, you just want to think long term. A lot of people just think about what's happening right now, but when you grow a business, you got to think long term. And like you said before, right? Like you want, you can't expect the business to overnight be like that. Like overnight success stories, there's usually like 10, 15 years of work involved before that person becomes what you think is an overnight success. That's all important. It's all part of the process.
But don't you think also this is something which kind of hit me right now, that headshot photography in general teaches us as a photographer be more patient and have like a little bit different approach to people, because we have to deal with them like face to face? Because like sometimes you have those like big executives or CEOs, whatever, they just look at the numbers, right? And they don't really kind of have that how my decisions affect people. But in our kind of profession, we have to deal differently, because like we dealing with like actual with people, and also we dealing with them on a very personal level. So I had this like a quick story which happened to me several years ago on one of my workshops. I have a gentleman who was one of the big CEOs at one of the big tech companies, and he says to me that well, the job was fantastic, paid him a lot of money, and then he had like the benefits and all the financial benefits was amazing. But he says like I was just cutthroat, kind of person who has to just meet the numbers, meet the challenges, and there's like a lot of tension between people. And he was like, I was mentally wrecked. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, look, you have two options. You're going to either kind of slow down or just kind of take a break, or you're going to just die from either heart attack or stroke. And he says he bought the camera and he started taking photos of, family. And that he says that was his kind of relief of this tension. And then he's like, I wouldn't push this more. And he started shooting headshots, because he's like, that was the first time where I could connect with people on a personal level. And that's what kind of gave me belief in people again, that I can connect with them, I can work with them, I can deal with them, and I have to be patient with them. So that was just for me, like I'm like, wow, that's just amazing story to showing you like not only how amazing our the work we do, but also how much impacted us as a people, right? So that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. And think about it this way too. Like many of the people who come to your studio for a headshot, that's the very first photo they're going to see of themselves that they actually like. Like when you think of it that way, it's like, wow. There's, I've had people who they look at the screen and they start crying, and it's not because for the bad reasons, it's because they're like, I've had clients more than once where they just kind of tear up, and then I start to tear up because they say to me, I've always felt ugly, and this is the first time I feel like that, like you've captured who I really am and who I want the world to see. So when you experience things like that, yeah, it really puts it into perspective. You're dealing with real people, and not two of them are alike. That's the other challenge for us, right? It's challenging, but it's also the fun of it, is that every single face that comes into your studio is completely unique. It's totally different than the one that you photographed yesterday. And it keeps it fun and interesting, and it makes it challenging. And it also shows you how this really is like you said, like it's all about people. And really understanding like, well, what we do is it's all based around individuals and people, and helping those people to be the best, help them to feel and look their best. That's what I like to do.
And I'll go with one step further with this to make this even more emotional for people who's going to be watching this. I actually have a client who passed away, and I shot his headshot, and he died from cancer. And the same thing. His wife said, this is the most pressure, memories from me, when she lost him. And that's also kind of hit me so hard, because like, we don't even realize, we creating not only headshots, but we're also creating memories, and someday those pictures might have so much value for some people we can't even imagine. So
Right. Yeah. Peter Hurley talks about that quite a bit. And
okay.
he mentioned, actually, he was talking about this a couple of weeks back, where he
Hmm.
said that when someone's house is burning down, they grab the photos. That's what they go and
Yeah.
grab. And it's like, wow, yeah, it really shows, and it reminds you how important it is. Like that is something that people will treasure forever. And I feel like what we do is it's very important work, and especially um, if you're doing it well and you're doing it with passion, like that's at the end of the day. I don't want to do anything that I'm not passionate about,
Hmm.
and I did not get into this um, for money. Right now, making money obviously is good and important, and we want to be able to do that. But I don't feel like I'm working when someone
Yeah.
comes into my studio and I'm taking their photos. It never feels like work. It's always something that I look forward to, and it's fun. I enjoy it, and you really are creating these memories for people. It's a pretty awesome thing. I mean, then I constantly am telling my wife, I can't believe people give me money to take a picture of them. It's awesome. It's like such
Yeah.
a cool thing. And so, but yeah, it's true. What we do is very important, and it's a skill. It's a difficult skill to learn. But someone like me, I didn't have it at all, and so it's like anything. If you really invest into learning, and you got to be humble too. Like
Yes.
those people who come in who are difficult, you learn the most from them too. So at the end of the day, nobody likes dealing with difficult people, but you're going to learn a lot more than the person who came in, you took 5 photos of, and they were like, I love these, bye. You're not going to learn nearly as much from that. So that's part of it too.
Yeah, but you know what? Those difficult people, I don't think they realize what we even do sometimes, right? Sometimes, as you said, they might be forced to do that.
Right.
Sometimes they have some, as you said, like some issues from childhood, or some trauma from, I don't know, when they were growing up. That there's a million reasons why they want to have why they don't want to have their photo taken, right? But I think that's why they coming, because they know we are professional, and then we know how to approach this whole thing and how to capture them the best way possible.
Right.
So I think sometimes there's a lot of hidden stuff I found, and they maybe deep inside they want to have an image where they're going to be, look really really good. But I think the process to get there, that's what scares them. As you said, if you have a, like, toothache, and then you go into the dentist, always you're scared, right? But when they fix it, you go through the process, it's a little bit painful, the next day you're good. Okay, like, okay, now I'm fine, right? So I think the same with the headshots, is they scared of the process, how they can get there, right? And then just kind of like exposing themselves fully to somebody else who they sometimes don't know. That's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. But you also get a lot of people who are just like totally cool from the first shot, and it's fun and it's easy. So I don't want it to make it out
Yeah.
like it's for me, the better, and I think the better we become as photographers, the more you figure out your own craft and process, there's going to be less and less people who it'll be less challenging, because
Yes.
like we kind of started with, right? You can see, well, when people come in my studio, I'm just seeing right away, okay, I think this, even before they're behind the light, so I definitely want to photograph them from this side, or from that side, or I can see maybe their nose goes a little bit askew one way, so maybe I'll shoot it from the other way. We'll make it look straighter, stuff like that. So the better you become at it, the more fun it becomes too, because then
Yeah.
it's like, it's a it makes it easier in that regard. So you got to study and do all of that, and then the more you know about how to do it, the easier it becomes in a lot of ways too.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're running a little bit out of time. We went over an hour, but I have one more question for you.
Sure,
So,
sure.
what would be one advice to someone who is starting off? they really want to get into the headshot photography, and you as an experienced photographer, what kind of advice you would give to that person?
Okay, so number one, as I said before, I really do believe that the quickest way to advance your skills is with a mentorship. So I know in my life, I would have, I think I would have gotten here, but where I am now, but maybe it would have taken, 10 years instead of 2 years or whatever, if I just did it in a vacuum. So one of the beauties of the internet, for all of the non-beautiful parts about our online world, is that you can connect with people all over the world. You can be coached by people all over the world, and it's very easy in some ways to find a great mentor. I apologize, somebody's knocking on my door.
Okay,
Hang in there for a second.
sure.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
It's just the Amazon guy just kept knocking.
Oh, I thought it's a client, so I hope.
No. No, I made sure not unless they're coming at the wrong time, right?
Okay.
So I really believe in mentorship. I believe that like being being mentored by Peter has really been made a profound difference in my life. And then outside of that, and then also, by the way, one of my mentors is Felix Kuhns. Like I'm an active member in Felix's group, and I've studied all his lighting tutorials, and so I use a lot of that as well. So wherever you go, find the knowledge and acquire it, and don't just think you can do it just because you own a camera. And right, this is what happens a lot of times. People, especially, and I know that's why we more experienced photographers, usually we don't like talking so much about gear as much as novices, because you realize, like, well, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything. The gear doesn't matter. It matters you need to have the skills. So don't think that, well, I bought $10,000 worth of camera gear, my photos are going to be great. It unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. It's all about your skills. So I say, be proactive about building your skills, and then you just gotta do it. You get to a point where it's just like, well, you got to just put yourself out there. You have to just drag people in front of your camera. You have to post photos. I'm a big believer in posting photos online for critique. If you're in a community of photographers that are not just like, trolling to tear you down, but if you're in a supportive community of photographers, and they are out there, where you want to grow your skills and you post photos for critique, people will help you. I wouldn't be where I am at all if not for many photographers who helped me and mentored me, whether online or in person or both, and many of them have become my good friends now. So I think you just gotta make it happen, and it's more important, I think, connecting in those groups. Invest in that before you start investing in a bunch of camera gear.
And I want to add one more thing to this, because this is fascinating what you just have said, but also we're living in the times where people more open to help you, right? Because I remember when I started my photography journey, nobody would share anything. Like,
Right.
it was just literally impossible to get any information out of any photographer, because they would just keep this stuff for themselves. Now we're on the completely opposite kind of side, where people, sharing, they helping, they mentoring, they give you advice, they will like look into your photos, they will tell you how you can improve them. So to all those also photographers, you're living in amazing times, because you have all those resources where people are really open to give you a hand and to take you through step by step through some of those things. But you still have to be open to ask for help, right? Nobody's going to be walking and running after you. You need to somehow kind of ask for the help. But the communities are there. There's a lot of support. And I think also, for whatever reason, I found headshot photography, like the industry and the community, is really helpful. Like, people really helping each other, which I never seen in wedding industry. That was completely on the other side. But headshots, for whatever reason, and I don't know who started process, but I think we are kind of completely different community than any other ones. So that's something which we should kind of keep it going and cherish, and making sure we helping each other.
Right. And you got to be teachable too, right? So
Yeah.
you can ask for, I've had people, I've seen people who have been in coaching groups or whatever, and they're like, they can't take any criticism though. So, all right, well, if you don't, like, one thing that I think has always, it's kind of a double-edged sword for me personally, because I struggle with like always wanting to get better, but then sometimes not. If you do that, you might never feel like you're good at it. But I think it's better to be like that than to be like, oh, I'm the best when your work sucks, because then there's really no hope for you. You're never going to get any better. So you have to be teachable. Like every time I have a client, it's always something, or when I create a photo, I'm creating art. You know, I want to be an artist, and that's what I really feel. Even with headshots, if you're doing it well, it's art. It's art. But I'm never resting on it and saying, all right, I'm happy. I'm always trying to grow and learn. So that's another part of it too. You have to really be able to accept the critique. And you're totally right. Like nowadays, there are so many people who are willing to help you. Like a lot of in the past, a lot of people. I think there's still some photographers out there who are like very closed. They don't want you to know their secret sauce. But you know,
usually they 80 plus, right? But the younger generation, they
the generational thing. Yeah. Well, my quick story before we close. My music mentor, one of my heroes, is the great jazz bassist Ray Brown. And so when you learn jazz, what you do is you basically copy the people who you love. Like you literally, a big part of becoming a jazz musician is transcribing, which means I sat down with countless recordings of Ray Brown playing bass and learned note for note his bass lines and solos to the point where I could play them from memory and play them along with the record. So it's copying to a degree that's like 100%. But having done all of that, that definitely impacted my playing. And when you hear my bass playing, you will say, oh, he's clearly influenced by Ray Brown. But it's never going to sound like Ray. I'm never going to be Ray Brown. So I think that, you know, being open and sharing that, like, I can tell you everything that I do as a photographer. Your photos will never look like mine. Now, maybe there'll be similarities and maybe there'll be influences, but that's the beauty of the whole thing, is that, you know, when you share, it only makes me better. It improves other people's work too. And there's enough to go around for everybody. I really believe that.
Absolutely. 100%. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. We went way over the time. I'm really sorry that I stretched it a little bit, but I think we had a good conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to do
I
it.
will link all the information to your stuff. I'm sharing your stuff on my group too, because there's a lot of interesting, videos and some kind of feedback. So fascinating. Please continue doing this, because there's a lot of amazing knowledge. And thank you again for the time. I hope we will do it again at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rafael. This was great. It was so great meeting you. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.